Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. This episode brought to you by Roll20.net, the world's largest virtual tabletop. Check them out today at Roll20.net. Follow the show on Facebook at SWGM Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at SWGM Podcast. Check out the YouTube channel at SWGM Podcast. And subscribe to us on iTunes, Savage Worlds Game Master Podcast. Nailed it! Tonight's topic, the rules. And here to discuss it, of course, Dave, the rules man, Scott.
Greetings and salutations.
And Dustin, the Savage intern.
I say, how are we doing?
We are gibless and Chrisless tonight. Everybody needs to go to bagadicks.com and email and send the year 2017 a bag of dicks.
Yeah,
in their honor.
And just like that, we got the E rank.
Getting it out of the way early. This show is TVMA, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to talk about rules, and that's always a delightful topic. Hey, Jared?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to start with the opposed roll rule that we kind of stumbled across from the G Plus Savage Worlds community. Earlier this week, there's a post about, wait a minute, it says the opposed rules that the attacker rolls first because he sets the target number, spends any bennies he wants, then the defender rolls, and when the two of them are in a tie, they're locked in a never-ending struggle for that round. There is no clear victor. So that works great when we're doing a push or we're trying to do a grapple. I'm all for you kind of lose your turn because you're locked in this never-ending back and forth. I'm good with that. Not so much when it comes to the tricks and test of wills.
Yeah, there's a lot of places where opposed roll is used where you need some form of an immediate resolution, whether that's a defender victory or a attacker victory. You have to have something, whether it's the opposed spirit roll on a puppet, whether it's opposed on a smarts trick. You're not going to wait till the next turn to see if the smarts trick carried forward or not. I mean, some of these points just, it doesn't make sense to follow that rule the way it's written. And I think at least every GM I've played with uses the exact same version of this rule, which is re-roll all ties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, I know some GMs, some very player-centric GMs will go, by default, a tie goes to the player character. I've seen that played as well.
I saw earlier today, I believe it was Sean Patrick Fannin had said that the aggressor always wins the tie. But my problem with either the players win all ties or the aggressor wins all ties is anything that does that should remove the edge killer instinct because it makes it completely useless. You know, it's like the guy who buys quick draw and then you let everybody draw their weapon for free.
Right. And for those who aren't familiar, the killer instinct edge means that you win all ties automatically. And you add, is there something about it rolling a 1 on the trait die with that edge? Coming to mind.
I've got my book open.
I'm trying to remember. I think it's you had +1.
That's not it. Half reading chat when you mumbled through that, so I've got no idea what you're talking about.
Killer instinct. Second.
Wins a ties, may re-roll if the skill die comes up as 1.
Right, yeah. You get a free re-roll if you get a 1 on the trait die.
But regardless, you know, and Chris Redmond piped into chat on this going, you know, well, there's the killer instinct edge that gives all ties to the player with the edge. No, to the character with the edge. Remember, NPCs can take the edges just like player characters can. You can give, you know, the NPC big bad killer instinct because he always, you know, wins those ties.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the different types of opposed rolls because it's a good roll in and lean into opposed rolls in Savage Worlds in general. To make a push maneuver, it's straight opposed strength rolls. That's all it is. Now and I know if you go to the Superpowers Companion, we'll have rules for knockback, or we'll have all these other kind. I've seen like people in Savage fan conversions coming up with rules for picking somebody up and body slamming, throwing them, having a mechanic for that. Not needed.
Yeah,
it's all push. It's all push. Just like I don't care if you're fighting as bare knuckled or karate kicks. I don't give a two shits what your style of fighting is. That's a trapping. So, like, even grabbing somebody by their sword arm and swinging them and letting them go, to me, is still handled as a push maneuver.
Well, the interesting aspect to that, let's take that to the next level. Let's talk like a WWE match where the one guy grabs the other guy, they do a suplex, and wham, he's going to throw him down on the ground. He's going to take some damage. Mm-hmm. That is nothing more than an unarmed attack where you did strength damage to the opponent, unless you want the opponent to stay laying down. If your action in a mechanical sense results in that other character not getting back up, it becomes two actions. It's a push prone and an attack. It's an unarmed attack and a push prone. Doesn't matter. You might argue the order of what happens when, because of the fact you want that +2 to hit them because their parry is reduced by being knocked prone. You can argue that with your GM, but a suplex is really nothing more than an unarmed attack that both characters get back up at the end of the combat round. It's just kind of assumed as part of that action that's all narrative trapping around that unarmed attack. But if you're wanting the character to stay down, Jared's upon this body slam at the beginning, that absolutely is a push and an unarmed attack because you're still standing, your opponent's not. And you want them specifically laying on the ground at the end of the round.
Well, and the other thing too. Go ahead, Dustin. Sorry.
I was going to say, like, the issue that comes to it, and I've seen this not just in like these rules questions, but also like in the overarching issue. We're trying to make this more complicated than it is. So I'm going to pose a question to you. How do you stick a giraffe in the refrigerator?
One piece at a time.
You open the door and you push him in. It's a simple answer. Advance is doing the basics well, but people just can't wrap their head around this is too easy.
Right.
Like a push is just strength.
Yeah, and we talked about this before. I pulled this on Jared in the game where I had my character wade up out of the water. We were being attacked by wolves as we came ashore. So I have him grab 2 handfuls of wolf tail, spin around like a freaking hammer thrower at the Olympics, and let go, sending this wolf sailing out into the bay. It's just a push. It was just my strength, the wolf's strength, and he went 1 inch for every success and raise that I achieved on that particular check. It didn't matter that narratively that's me grabbing it by the tail and spinning around and throwing it. That was just the narrative we did around the mechanic. The narrative and the mechanic don't have to match. And I think a great example of that is what we were talking about before we even went live, Jared, is your opposed role in the Matrix of Trinity using smarts against the guard in the shack as she launches a motorcycle into the building. Why is it only a smarts trick? Because all she's trying to do is get him to come running out of the building with his hair on fire. She's not actually trying to do any damage.
Right, and if you watch Reloaded, is what we were talking about too. Like the other thing, that whole motorcycle thing is nothing more than a setup for the shot of her doing the 3-point squat in front of exploded fire. Cause damn, it's sexy. That's really what it's there for. Is it causing any damage? No. Do we care about who? No, we don't care about who was injured. That's the whole reason it's there. That's the only reason it's there.
And then player was trying to get a Benny.
Oh, that you did something super fucking cool. Here's a Benny. You've got this. You understand what the Matrix is about. Good job spending your turn doing that. The other thing too is she does this whole thing where she takes her helmet off and still has the sunglasses on. By the way, for anybody who hasn't watched it in a while, as she takes her helmet off, she's got the sunglasses on, in the total leather cat suit, jumping around, hitting guys, karate moves. There's one thing where she does this thing where she basically jumps and swan arcs over them, hitting them in the head with the helmet as she comes around the other side. Agility trick. That's all that is. Her intent's not to kill him, not to injure him. It's to stun him. So, and we've kind of had this talk too with the ogre and the blinding and the cut before, that kind of conversation.
The Paul Wiggy Williams version of it, which is, the guy who does this complex maneuver and all he's trying to do is blind his opponent for one round. Well, he's not even trying to blind him. He's just trying to stun him for a round. It's an agility trick.
Right.
The same thing goes. Hold on a second. Same thing goes true for a chase. We talked about this a little while back. So why we're in this area of trapping for effect, I kind of want to touch on it real quick again. The whole thing where we're in a motorcycle chase. It's a crowded freeway. I'm on a rice burner, and I'm ahead of you. I get the action. I get the advantage in the action card. Instead of making an attack, I make a force maneuver, and that force maneuver is to bring the bicycle up on its front wheel, pivot. And with one arm, pivot it with the other arm, spray Ophi everywhere with the machine gun on full auto. I'm not trying to hit you. I'm not trying to do anything other than force you to make a driving roll, not to wreck.
Isn't that suppressive fire, though?
Okay,
No.
So here's what I would say. If this was being run as a round-by-round combat, I would absolutely allow you to say that Jared's stoppy maneuver with the machine gun is suppressive fire. And really, if his vehicle has the deceleration to stop like that, it's not even he doesn't even owe me a roll to have the bike go up on the front tire and spin around and spray the machine gun. But in a chase, I would not rule that as suppressive fire, because suppressive fire is not really an action you can take in a chase. You can attack, but are you really going to use suppressive fire in a chase? Unless maybe you're shooting at the other passengers, trying to, suppress them, shake them. No, you're trying that force maneuver to force that additional driving roll, to force those additional penalties. It all depends on intent. If Jared tells me all he's trying to do is to force you out of your lane or to force you to course correct, then it absolutely becomes immediately this. Here's the intent of it. It's a force maneuver. It's a in a bar fight, he wants to flash a shitty grin and hold the beer up this way so that somebody can step in behind you without you seeing and clock you from behind. It's still just a smarts trick. It doesn't matter what the action is. And this is what I was going to comment on in chat. We were getting a lot of people talking about grappling. Again, back to the WWE thing. I wouldn't have you roll grappling for any of those maneuvers because you're not attempting to grapple. A grapple means I'm going to grab hold of you, and at the end of the round, I'm still going to have a hold of you. Unless that's the intent, it's not a grapple. And it doesn't matter if that grab a hold of you is physical. It doesn't matter if it's with magic, big beast floating hand. It doesn't matter if it's through some superpower you have. It doesn't matter how you're achieving it. The grapple occurs when two people are grabbing hold of each other and seeing who comes out the victor. And in that case, again, the way the opposed roll is written in the book works better because you can fight to a standstill during a grapple where neither one of you is getting the better hold of the other. But I think in pretty much all the other cases of an opposed roll, it makes more sense that to shake out is something you're going to need to rectify by the end of the round.
Plus in a grapple, as the defender, you get a free attempt to break free on your next action anyway.
It does consume your entire turn if you attempt to break free. That is not a free attempt.
Okay, you can attempt to break free on your next action.
Yes.
But to the
as an action, you can choose to break free, or you can take any other action and I believe it a -2 penalty.
-4.
Yeah.
-4 if you grapple. I just want to mention this too with the push maneuver one more time. Just want to make sure we go back and touch that again real quick because Dave mentioned in the game 1 inch for every success and raise on that example. The actual rule is 1 inch for a success, 2 inches for a raise. In that game, Dave's absolutely right. I made it 1 inch per success because why the fuck not? Because it was cool.
I think we mostly run the 1 inch per success and raise because you and I both hate the idea of that's that first raise being a cap and not being able to gain anything if you have wild dice. But at the same time, no, there's a lot of stuff in Savage Worlds that 1 raise is all you get.
Right. And then here's the other thing too. If in that course of trajectory, if you're going back 6 inches or 12 inches, if you hit another obstacle, let's say a wall, a tree, it does 1d6 damage to you. If you're the unlucky slob who just got pushed. Now, if you get pushed off the edge of a cliff, well, yikes! 20d6 plus 10, 20
falling damage is for the height you fell off of. So
and that it's all bash, push, bash, all those things. It gives you little different changes to how you do it, but it's all push.
That's a great time to touch on Alec Muzzy's first question. He says, shield bash, no fighting roll required, just the opposed strength. And then it's strength plus 3 for damage with a large shield, even more if you can slam them into an obstacle. That's absolutely right. And I would go so far as to tell Alec, don't feel like that's a bypass of that fighting roll. That actually is harder than it is to hit them in combat, because your opponent can spend bennies on that opposed roll. No opponent in Savage Worlds ever gets to spend a benny and increase their parry, but boy howdy, can they look at you went after them with that opposed roll. As the aggressor, you have to roll for it first, and then the defender gets to react to that, and the defender can drop bennies all day long until they succeed, so long as that stack is sitting there.
Yep. And we'll get to a lot of the comments here in a second. One of the other things I want to talk about, one of the most overlooked rules in Savage Worlds is a jump. Doing a jump as a character. You want to talk about that one?
Go right ahead.
Jump. Let me go ahead and break out my deluxe core book.
It's essentially you make a strength roll. And for every success, you basically add 2 to your pace, your horizontal pace.
So pretty much it's like if it's 1 and you get a success, you can just jump up 1.
Across 6 inches.
Across 6 inches.
Across 1 inch or 6 feet in game time on the table. Oh, where was it? I just had it.
It's not 6 inches.
Not 6 inches. That's a superpowers companion. No, screw that.
I was going to say 6 inches in narrative space or 6 inches in real world space, because
so on the tabletop is a lot of real world
right.
Call the bulls. We got a new Jordan.
So, okay, here's the thing with Savage Worlds 2. You don't even need a special skill to jump 6 feet vertically from a dead stop. That's just basic. Anybody in Savage Worlds, any character in Savage Worlds can jump horizontally 6 feet from a dead stop. 2 with a run and go, and that's in quotation marks. As long as you're moving and jumping at the end or in the middle of that movement, you can go 12 feet. So in a successful, it's all about a successful strength roll, and you gain an inch of distance essentially.
Yet again, this is another place where effectively the rules, the way they're worded, do cap that. You can't just roll all the dice ever and have your character jump 6, 8, 10 inches. It just doesn't work. Now, if that
can't leave buildings in a single bound. You can't pull a Neo from the Matrix.
I'm like, why would you even run if you can do that?
Because you need to get across the 12-foot cavern of lava.
Dustin, leaping is an action, so of course you might walk or run instead to save yourself that action. You may not want that -2 even if you could roll 48.
I'm like looking at it thinking you can run and jump, and it's better than trying to fly if you have an arcane background.
Well, I mean, okay, so there's one of the ones that I absolutely can't stand is look at flight. There are 2 versions of flight in Savage Worlds. There's the version that comes with the superpower, and there's the innate, racial version. I believe it's listed both in the race creation rules as well as later on in the monstrous abilities. But if you look at those, they work fairly differently. And it can, if you get used to running one of those 2 sets of rules, you can very quickly find yourself, taking power away from either an NPC or a player character, or vastly overestimating what the fly power is capable of, because it can't do nearly as much as the racial flight can do.
So that's an interesting bit. When I was working on trying to build the splicers conversion, and I was using Savage Rifts and the Superhero's Companion, flight was one of those powers that I was like, it needs to be halved if it's going to stack up to what it is supposed to be or what they claim it should be. I'm just like,
well,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Here's the thing too that I think is a big misnomer is people look at the word climb and think of that as vertical movement. And climb is not necessarily vertical movement in Savage Worlds terms when it comes to flight. It's about your maneuverability.
Yeah, it absolutely suffers the same thing a lot of stuff in Savage Worlds suffers. Don't take these words to literally read the actual rule and how it's applied.
And I'm guilty of it too. My first knee-jerk reaction when I look at the flight power is, with flight, this is fucking hover. I can't go, it's zero climb, so I can't go vertical? What the fuck?
I was under the impression that you could go half your pace vertically if you could fly.
No, I think it has to be like one or the other. You have to like make a conscious decision to go, okay, I'm going to move my pace straight vertical, or I'm going to move my pace straight horizontal. When you bring in climb, you're talking about your maneuverability to go from one to the other.
So,
and it's really only used in chases. Here's the other thing too: the climb rate's really only used in chases. When one vehicle has a better climb than the other, and more maneuverability
is like a maneuverability thing.
Yeah.
When determining who gets a bonus in a chase, that's true. As far as vertical movement, no, Jared, it's not an either or. You can do a combination of both. You can go at an angle, and Dustin's right. The last time I checked, and I could be wrong here, it's like moving through difficult terrain, climbing at half pace.
Right. I'm actually looking it up here in vehicle. I'm going to try and look it up in powers too, but yeah, that's how I remember it. When I've had to look this up before, is that climb was half your pace, or your ability to climb up was half your pace, and every point just kind of took out some of that difficulty in it. But I'm like, the way you guys are describing it, like if climb is maneuverability, shouldn't that sort of apply penalties to being hit?
Well, it's almost like a dodge kind of thing.
Yeah.
Here's the thing: it's only really used in my experience, at least in Savage Worlds. It's only really used in the chase rules.
Yeah, that is one place that it actually gets compared to anything else, and then it's just to determine who gets the bonus for being more maneuverable. Just like if you're talking ground vehicles, it's who gets the bonus for being faster.
Right.
That's what climb really is utilized for in that regard.
Right. For example, when you look at the bestiary in Savage Worlds, a dragon has a flying pace of 24 and a climb is 0, because it's this huge monolithic. Well, it can't turn on a dime.
Yeah. So we've lost chat. They're having this really interesting conversation regarding shields and how a shield only gives its protection to left or right and forward. It's got a facing rule when 85% or more of Savage Worlds doesn't use facings. And I would urge people not to think that. Savage Worlds does not fail to use facings. It just doesn't charge you anything for facing. It absolutely cares about your facing, especially when we start talking about things like shield. I want to say there was one other I was thinking of just a few minutes ago, and I've gone mentally dumb because we're doing one conversation chat, one conversation here. But there's this misnomer that Savage Worlds doesn't care about facing, and it's true. You can defend yourself from all directions. You don't take a penalty to parry just because something got behind you. But that doesn't mean that we don't care about when it's behind you versus in front of you.
Right, and the limitation, the cap on the gang up bonus is part of that facing, because you can only be surrounded on 4 sides. Right? That's why it's capped off at a +3. for a single individual in a gang
3.
up. +4 max.
It's +4.
+4 max.
Stop and think about this for a second. The way most of us are playing the game, we're using the old D&D maps, the square layout grids. You know, that's the way most of us are playing because it's easier to count squares than it is to pull out fucking measuring tape and measure, 6 inches on the tabletop. So people who are doing the miniatures on the table version of the game know that a single mini sitting in the center of a square can have 8 opponents pile up on it. I mean, it's just the way that math works. You're taking up the 9th spot out of the 3x3 grid. You can have 8 guys, but they're only going to get a +4. You can absolutely get surrounded horribly, and it doesn't matter where in that they're at. They're only going to get that +4 benefit. The whole gang up maneuver handles they're flanking you, they're coming at you from the side, they're coming at you from behind, but it handles it in a very abstract manner where we don't talk about facing. We don't have a lot of rules dealing with facing, but it doesn't mean that Savage Worlds doesn't care about facing. It just means that Savage Worlds doesn't care about facing for all of these things. And here's the list of stuff it does care about. And Shields is absolutely on that list.
Well, one of the things I want to point out is in terms of facing, we have the drop. Think about that for a minute. Your stealth roll is so good that you walked in front of the guy, you just like crouched down below his eye level and just stabbed upward and got him in the face.
Well, see,
No.
and again, here's where...
No, I don't think so.
Stealth doesn't mean you didn't fucking see them. And if you look, stealth includes hiding, sneaking, all that stuff. But those are
hand
stuff. Stop and think about this for a second. Stealth could just be a sucker punch. I want to give a stealth roll so you don't fucking see the haymaker coming. That's it. I don't have to hide. You can fucking be looking me dead in the eye. If you don't see my knee coming up and connecting with your nuts, I probably got the drop on you. And I probably dropped you to your knees.
Well, and here's the thing too. Like the GM can declare the drop at any time.
So interesting thing. There is no rule anywhere in Savage Worlds that carte blanche awards the drop. Nothing.
And it's not surprise. There's different rules for surprise, ladies and gentlemen. And ambush.
There are rules for what the drop does. There are edges that affect the drop. But there's no actual rule that says, hey, make this roll, get the drop. The GM determines carte blanche when the drop occurs. Now, most of us are aware the GM's going to give you the drop when it's appropriate. And there's a lot listed there for when the drop is appropriate. But there's nothing that actually says, do X, receive Y in regards to the drop.
Right. And I'll give you 2 situations. Just throw out some examples. Things work best with examples in my experience with rules for Savage Worlds. My character taps Dave's character on the shoulder while he's sleeping. Dave character bleary-eyed goes, huh? And I punch him in the face. I've got the drop because Dave is not expecting to get a punch in the face. I kick open the door to a bathroom stall. I have the drop. I've got you tied to a chair because I'm interrogating you. And I ask you a question, you don't answer, and I throw a wicked right hook. I've got the drop.
I think, yeah, I think people just can't wrap their head around that because when they get the idea of, oh, it's a stealth roll, it's like, no, narrative. It's much more narrative. Now, I'm going to make a case here where people think that is the reason that if you read it, there's a portion that talks about active sentries and passive sentries. Mm-hmm. And when people read active and passive sentries, they're like, okay, he's an active sentry. I can't get the drop on him. Or, oh, he's a passive sentry. That means he's not paying attention. Now I can get the drop on him. But they're totally disconnected. People don't know that they're not connected. It's just they make that association because of how it just seems to make sense in everybody's head.
Right. It seems like a surprise maneuver. It feels like backstab kind of rules from D&D. That's how everybody kind of applies it.
And that's, I think, the unfortunate aspect is that it's a carryover from the fact, let's be honest, 85, 90% of the people playing Savage Worlds used to play D&D. So stealth worked a very specific way in D&D. Stealth and facing had massive impact on the game in D&D. So people are expecting that from Savage Worlds. So when Savage Worlds doesn't award you that bonus for getting behind the opponent or being on opposite sides of the opponent, the immediate thought is, well, Savage Worlds doesn't care about facing. Just like the immediate thought is, oh, well, you must get the drop when you roll stealth because that's what has always followed in other games, but it's not the case.
Right. Now, I think we'd be remiss if we talked about the drop and didn't talk about finishing moves. So I want to.
No, I mean,
if you're in a completely defenseless position, I don't even have to make a fighting roll. I just announce I killed you.
Okay, but again,
coup de grace.
100% defenseless.
Right.
If you can wiggle away, you're not defenseless.
Right. So, if you go blurkers in a combat because of incapacitation, guess what an extra can do to you? Bend over, stick a knife in your ear, and move on quietly. Your character's dead. There's no roll to be made. Night, nurse. Goodbye. Nice seeing you. Thanks for playing. Here's a year's worth of rice-a-roni, the San Francisco treat. Now get the fuck out of here. You're done. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that there is this powerful thing called a finishing move where you don't even have to make a fighting roll or roll damage. You just kill. You just gank somebody in the game. They're dead. Period. Dead. So just wanted to throw that out there as a, well, who cares if you get incapacitated in combat?
I just wanted to point out Carlin Kendrick in the chat said that it's a great time to use the sleeping spell.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a combo, folks.
Yeah, stop and think about that.
Sleep, slit.
I mean,
and not even wild cards are immune. Not even wild cards are immune to, hey, you're completely defenseless. If I want to kill you, you're dead.
So let's try this. Now, remember, you can potentially wake them up, though, right? Because let's be honest, I think like everybody's going to have like arcane background, magic, slumber, D8 stealth, dagger. We've just created the D&D rogues in Savage World.
I mean, I don't know. What does the sleep gives you any kind of a chance to wake up against loud noises? And the only reason I rarely use powers, very rarely use powers, but
slumber. Let's take a look at.
I believe you wake up instantly upon taking damage is the way it's worded. I don't think it actually words you can wake up. No, loud noises awaken the sleeper as if they were a normal
sleep.
Simple notice roll. When the duration expires, the sleeper naturally awakens. So, I mean, depending on what we're arguing as far as loud noise,
here's what I would allow. Here's what I would allow.
From the sheep is not a loud noise, folks.
Right. See how you feel about this. Casting slumber on you when I'm not too far away, like from hiding, like slumber on everybody in this area and they all fall down to sleep. And I want to walk up and just start killing people as a finishing move. For a player character, I might allow them a notice roll like a -4, like the same, like for somebody who's got like a hard of hearing or something like that, maybe. But if you're walking up and slitting people's sleeping characters' throats with a knife, It's not making a lot of noise. I wouldn't call that a loud sound.
You could take the poverty hindrance and literally be a murder hobo.
So there was there was another one I wanted to touch on real quick.
Well, I mean, we got a pretty decent stack forming here.
All right, let's read some of it off.
So let's see, Alec Muzzy. The one debate we had with Sean Patrick Fannin, if a character can do heavy damage because of a high strength, can a non-heavy melee weapon do heavy damage simply because the character is strong? So first of all, I'm going to cry ignorance. I have not read the Rift's book. So if this is something from the Rift's book, this is a case where the Maven has no clue and really doesn't care because I'm not a fan of Rifts, unfortunately.
I think I actually have the answer to this. Is because if you go to the Superheroes Companion, you can take attack melee, and you can do heavy damage with your attack melee, and you can choose.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and you can have switchable. So, or stackable, I mean, sorry. So you can actually have a weapon that does damage in conjunction with your melee attack. And I would say yes, because if one aspect is heavy, they're all heavy.
Yes, if you've paid for the power, it's always on. That's the thing with the superpowers. If any superpower you have, always on. Unless you're choosing not to use it, it's always on. So yes, if you've bought this, heavy damage, you're going to get it with any attack you do. Now, I would argue that if you picked up a normal weapon, there's an equal chance that I might, as a GM, rule the weapon's only good for one attack. Because, you've just swung it harder than it was ever intended to be swung, and you've bent the hell out of it. But absolutely, I think that penalizing the player character like that by saying, no, you don't get the ability that you paid for, just doesn't really... that's not a great thing.
No, but what's the thing in that game is all the NPCs start showing up in heavy armor.
There's a hack that if you're building a superhero, you can take 1 point of armor and then do the +3 heavy armor, and then no regular weapon hurts you. You're just walking around. I did that with a character, and my character would get hit with like regular weapons and take no damage and pretend like he was getting hurt, so nobody thought to get out high-powered weapons.
That's some dedication.
Right?
The funny thing, I've actually run heavy weapons and heavy armor wrong on this show. Jared had a character who was absolutely blown away in one of the games that I was GMing, where I made the mistake and said, no, that's a heavy weapon. Your armor doesn't count, and just let him freaking get shredded. That's not the effect it has. All heavy weapons do is mean you can hit an opponent with heavy armor. It doesn't mean it shreds through normal armor.
That's a rules question I had with a friend before. He saw that he had blast, he had burst, and he read, "Oh, heavy weapon. That means it negates all armor." And I'm like, "No, it just means you can destroy vehicles." Yeah, and that's one of the questions that came up before about rules. Just tangent on Savage Rifts. If it's MDC or mega damage, it's heavy. That's it. It's just because it's a licensing issue and it goes in conjunction with the original material. They would always call it mega damage or MDC mega damage capable. It just means heavy. It just means this would go on a vehicle. This would be like a tank. And that's one of the rules questions going off of heavy armor and heavy damage. People are like, oh, you can, like, if you get enough explosions, you can kill a tank with a fork. And I'm like, no, you can't. A fork is not a heavy weapon.
So let's kind of explain real quick then what heavy weapons, heavy armor, and AP, armor piercing arm, what they do in Savage Worlds.
So I mean, this gets a lot more confusing when you add in things like bullets. So let's talk about it from a rules natural state of point, and then we'll talk about what bullets have. Standard heavy weapon simply means it can hit heavy armor. Heavy armor simply means it cannot be damaged by a non-heavy weapon. It just paints off of it. I mean, it's that simple.
So, for example, I could have a machine gun with AP2 or armor piercing 2, full auto, and fire it against the tank, and it just goes ricochets off of it, right? Because the tank is heavy armor.
Yeah, you're not Tom Hanks who thinks he shot the tank that blew up at the end of Saving Private Ryan. No, that was the P-51 that flew over and dropped a bomb in the back of it.
He looked at it like, why didn't I just do that to begin with?
Now, I can.
You got a 9mm that was blowing up tanks. You would never use another weapon.
Now, I can get up to the tank, stick the pistol through an exhaust port or a viewport, and start shooting people inside, right?
I would argue, and we'll touch on this in a few
Or a tiny target.
Target called shot all day long from as far away as you want against the tank. And
I can do that cool maneuver where I take a live grenade and throw it down the barrel of the main tank weapon, and it blows up everybody inside, right?
Only if you have a crossbow.
Now, AP, straight armor piercing, simply means that whenever you attack with an AP weapon, look at the opponent's armor and reduce it by that amount. Not the opponent's toughness, the opponent's armor. If you have more AP than they have armor, that AP is wasted. It doesn't continue to take away toughness.
Right.
I don't care how sharp your katana is. If you're fighting a guy who's not wearing armor, that AP that it has doesn't matter.
Okay, and I want to bring this up too, because this is one of the things that just confused the hell out of me the first time I started playing Savage Worlds. We had a character with armor. The way Savage Worlds notates armor is it adds the armor in parentheses and then ups it by that amount of the total toughness of the character. So if I have a character with 5 toughness,
it's the armor on a stat block.
Right. So when I'm looking at stat block, I can have a character with a 5 toughness wearing armor for 2 points, and it will say 7 parentheses 2. That's letting me know that 7 2 points that's making 7 is coming from armor. Yeah. So when I shoot, I shoot an armor piercing round at that character that we're using as an example with a 7 toughness, 2 of it coming from armor, and I hit for 6 points of damage. How much damage gets through, Dave?
See, you had to make it about bullets.
Yeah, let's do bullets.
Let's not look at bullets just yet, because I don't want to tackle that until we get everybody understanding a traditional armor piercing. All right,
hold on. Let me
be on a freaking club.
Let me hit rewind on the podcast. Armor 7 with parentheses 2. Toughness 7 parentheses 2 armor.
So
it only takes away 2.
That AP2 reduces their toughness from 7 down to 5, and at that point, you have 6 points of damage against 5 toughness. You've shaken the target.
Because the AP bypasses the armor.
The armor.
Right. Now, I'm going to go ahead and throw something out there too, guys. And this is... So in Savage Rifts, some of the armor actually has what's called embedded toughness.
Oh, I don't want to go down the Savage Rifts rabbit hole. We understand Savage Rifts is its own thing.
Its own monster. If we sat here and tried to break out all the specialty rules from all the different settings, we'd be here all night. That's a much bigger topic. And Rifts is also written by Sean Patrick Fannin, who likes to take everything, turn it up to 12, and break the knob off. Again, I understand we have a lot of Rifts fans in the audience. Read the book. If you have a question, please. Sean is available on Facebook, on Google+. Tag him. He absolutely actually responds to that stuff.
Plus, remember, Rifts is a setting book that uses the Savage Worlds core rules. So I really want to talk about core rules.
Core rules.
Yeah.
Oh, dear God, we got to talk about...
Okay, so wait, what happens if I'm standing in a puddle with my armor on and you have an electrical trapping on your bolt and you hit the water for bolt?
First of all, it does nothing unless I've paid
the extra power points, right?
Power point for the effect. That's a big aspect there. Just because your trapping narratively says it's fire, there's all those additional effects from fire you have to pay for when you cast the power.
Wait, you mean it doesn't automatically go through because I say it has an electricity trapping and electricity bypasses most armor?
No, you have to actually pay that extra, I think it's 1 or 2 power points for armor penetration as an effect from your trapping. And then it just bypasses the armor. And I don't care if you're standing in the mud puddle or not. If you paid for armor, for that armor penetration on the electrical power, it just goes to the armor. Just like it does with fire, it always hits, it always hits the least armored location, things like that. If you make that conscious decision to pay for that armor penetration, you absolutely are going to get the armor penetration. Now, that's not to say that if I, throw a Molotov cocktail at your feet, that I have to, have a specialty armor penetration Molotov cocktail. Fire as a normal thing hits the least armored area. But remember, with your trapping effects, if it's listed as an effect, it'll also be listed with the PowerPoint cost to activate that effect. And you have to do it when you declare you're starting the cast.
So here's a trick. If you have an electrical trapping for one of your powers, if you spend the extra, 1 power point, you can jolt an opponent or an ally out of shaken on a success on your arcane roll. You're no longer shaken. You're no longer shaken. You're no longer shaken. Just throwing that out there for things that people don't look about trapping effects for Savage Worlds. So back to our heavy armor.
Let's talk about ballistic armor.
Now I'm going to hit your tank with a bazooka, and my bazooka is a heavy weapon, and that bitch is armor piercing.
Okay.
So what effect does it have on the tanks with its heavy armor toughness?
The heavy weapon notation on the bazooka simply crosses out the heavy armor thing. Those two cancel each other out. Throw it away, doesn't matter. It's only if one or the other is missing. In fact, it's only if heavy weapon is missing and heavy armor is there. A heavy weapon against normal armor, nothing special.
Oh, no extra damage because it's heavy?
Correct. Now, again, rifts being a completely separate thing. But the AP on the bazooka is absolutely applied to the armor of the tank, and then you deal damage just like we talked about a few moments ago. But let's talk about bullets, because I avoided bullets for a very specific reason. If you look at the rules in Savage Worlds, a good number of guns, in fact, almost every gun in Savage Worlds has AP 2 or higher. There's a reason for that. Ballistic armor in Savage Worlds, your Kevlar, your flak jacket, etc., negate armor piercing up to a set value. So if you have AP 2 shooting against a guy in a Kevlar vest, your AP doesn't matter because it doesn't exceed the 4 points of AP negation that the Kevlar vest has. Also, if we look and take that to the next extreme, the Kevlar vest with ceramic inserts has +8 armor specifically against bullets. You can stab a motherfucker with a knife all day long in a Kevlar vest. That +8 doesn't matter. But if you shoot him, he has +8 armor versus you because you're using something that's weak against his armor. It's one of the very few times in Savage Worlds that we see such a minutia verisimilitude type rule in there, specifically attached to a piece of gear. It makes bullets and armor a headache. It's a lot more kind of grunt work at the table, figuring out, well, does your AP exceed the AP negation, and then how much armor do they have? Does that exceed their armor value? All to get to that fast, furious fun of I shot and did X damage.
Okay, anything else? Anything else in the chat room?
Oh, quite a bit, actually. We've still got a list here. There's a few things that are bubbling up. While we wait on a couple of these in, because I know Alec was going to leave early, Alec also asked about using a bystander as a body, as a human shield. And he was asking about cover. Well, one, I would probably award minimum half cover. It's not going to be full cover because full cover, they can't see you. But, I mean, absolutely, this is 3/4, this is half. You've got a lot of cover standing behind somebody else, depending on if it's a big fat guy in your little waif of a person standing behind them or something. You might argue full cover. But that said, Alex says, why does the toughness that removes from damage equal the toughness of the target? Well, there you're getting into something completely different, and that is there's some settings out there that talk about this idea that cover acts as armor. It doesn't. By the core rules, the only time cover gives you armor is against an area of effect attack. AoE damage, and you're in cover, you get your cover value as armor. So, if you've got 2 points of cover, it's 2 points of additional armor against that.
So what would example of that be? So, for example, I'm getting hit by a blast fire weapon, and I duck behind a stone or a tree.
Exactly
around me. Okay.
It's that whole Lord of the Rings moment where they step behind the pillar and the dragon breath separates and goes to either side. That full cover they had from the pillar, it gave them 4 points of additional armor. That's the only time core rules that cover acts as armor. Now, if they shoot you, you absolutely get a cover bonus for having this person in front of you. If they are trying to strike through, that classic scene from, the different movies out there where they shoot the hostage in the shoulder because it's going to pass through the hostage's shoulder and hit the guy in the heart, they have to do enough damage to exceed the toughness of whatever's in front of you to shoot through it, breaking an obstacle. And obstacle rules, whatever the obstacle's toughness is what you have to exceed to break it. Therefore, to shoot through a human body and hit the guy behind it, you have to exceed the toughness of the target to get that bullet to go pass through them.
Okay, so let's what's obstacle toughness for, like, let's say a steel door? I take cover behind a steel door. It's what, 10 is the obstacle toughness?
It's at that point I think it's because it's steel. It's been a while. Obstacle toughness doesn't come up in games. I don't remember them as well as I perhaps should.
Yeah, same here.
I would, in all honesty, for the average person, for the average human body, it's 5. You start giving them something like plate armor, it goes up to 9.
Yeah.
9 or 10. This is really I think it's kind of an arbitrary GM call. But then again, you're not going to get their tank armor, though.
It's the breaking things rule in the book that actually covers a lot of how this works. It's why it's confusing, because it's one of those things where here's the rule, and then much later in the book, here's another piece to that rule, shooting through cover, and then a little bit later in the book, here's the rule on how much toughness things have when you're trying to break them or bust through them. So a steel door, Jared, heavy door has a object toughness of 10.
Okay.
So, if you're trying to break the door down or shoot something through it, you're going to need to do at least 10 points of damage to break through it. That's that breaking things, shooting through cover type of thing. Again, it's because the rules are spaced out in multiple locations. You've got, here's the rules on cover. That's on page 76. The damage through cover is on page 79. The breaking things is on page 86.
Right, and then the list of things is on 185. Yeah.
You have to really go through the entirety of the book to know how each piece of that interweaves together to affect the scene. The simplest rule, though, is that armor from cover only occurs against AoE. If they're trying to break through your cover, it's a breaking of an object.
So let's say, for example, I'm a PC, a player character in a mob game, and some guy, we're in a restaurant, and we're under attack. The rival family's trying to put a hit out on me. So I got all these guys coming in, taking cover behind a brick wall that leads into the diner. So I kind of calculate where I think they're going to be and start unloading on that area. So they have full cover. So I'm at a -4?
Yep.
To my shooting roll. So I have to get a success on my shooting roll, even to shoot through that cover. Right? And then I've got to do enough damage.
No.
So they basically have +8 armor from it before it gets through?
Okay, so they dive for cover behind the wall, completely obstructed. You're at -4 to hit.
Okay.
That's what the cover grants. So where you needed a 4, now you need an 8.
Okay. So let's say I get that 8.
You hit. There's no additional benefit from the cover. If you hit, you hit.
Oh, so I don't have to overcome the toughness of the brick?
Correct.
As
if
armor?
You want to shoot through the brick wall to do damage to them.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to roll an 8 and bypass their additional cover. You have to roll a 2 because the target number of an object is 2.
Because it doesn't have any parry.
Well, that's if I'm trying to shoot like a glass bottle off a fence.
If you're trying to shoot it, you still need the 4 just to hit a ranged target. If you were trying to hit it with a bat or something of that nature, an inanimate object has a parry of 2.
Right.
An animate object, a vehicle is not an inanimate object. I saw this conversation come up on G Plus about a week ago. So it was like, well, a vehicle, it's an inanimate object, it has the stock standard parry of 2. No. A vehicle is animate, but it doesn't have the fighting skill. Therefore, it has 2 + 1/2 fighting, so it has a parry of 2. It's an animate object. It still comes out to a 2, but it's a very different thing than a brick wall that's completely inanimate. A vehicle is going to roll around. It's going to drive. It's going to be difficult to hit by that nature, which is why you need an opposed ramming rule to hit it while it's in motion.
Right.
But no, to just haul out and hit a tank with a baseball bat is the same difficulty as hitting the brick wall, but it's a different mathematical scheme to get there. But
okay, so hold on a second.
Brick wall.
Back.
So you cover behind the brick wall. They only have to roll a 4 to hit the brick wall in front of you, and then they have to achieve its toughness in damage to pass through that.
Hold on, you just said the opposite.
No, I said to hit you behind the wall, I need to roll an 8, and I have bent my shot up over it from the Wanted movie, or I have found that one little piece of your foot that's hanging out, and I have nicked you. I have gotten a shot through that hits nothing but flesh. If instead I say, fuck it, I can shoot through that bamboo wall he's sitting behind, and I just unload on the bamboo wall.
Okay.
Get the bamboo wall's object toughness.
I'm destroying the cover.
Not because you're in cover, but because I'm shooting through it to hit you. It's like, again, this is where we get into it's shooting through cover, it's breaking things. It's like hiding behind a door. It's not a question of, I'm no longer trying to hit you. I'm trying to hit the door, rip through the door, and hit whatever's behind it. You just happen to be in the way.
Right. So taking a called shot when they have cover behind a brick wall is narratively you chipping away at enough mortar so a bullet gets through.
No.
Essentially.
So called shot, you dive for cover. and I'm going to take a called shot head. As the GM, I have to stop and go. Well, Jared was behind a half cover. Does his head have cover? No. The cover only comes up to his waist. Cover is ineffective on this attack. The called shot has bypassed the cover, but the called shot has its own penalty.
Right. If
you're behind full cover, there the attacker is facing -6 plus the additional -4. You're stacking up your own penalties. But that's because it's a lot harder if I can't see you to find a piece of your head to shoot than it is to find any other piece of you that happens to stick out from that full cover so that I can bend that shot or lay that shot right along the edge and catch you sticking out from behind it. The big thing to remember with cover is, again, if you roll and succeed against a target in cover, it means you didn't hit the cover, you only hit them. If you roll to hit the cover, you're just rolling against a 4, and then you're adding its toughness to their armor because you're shooting through that.
So I'm going to give myself a tactical advantage by shooting out the plate glass window that you're trying to run by and getting cover from. Right? So, for example, like I run like in that same diner scenario, I see the guys coming up. They've got some cover from the plate glass window. I'd probably say light cover, right? Because it's plate glass, I can see through it. I'm not interested in hitting them. I just put it on full auto, and my whole thing is just to blast out that glass and leave a gaping hole where the window used to be, destroying their ability to have cover. So I'm making a shot against. I'm making a ranged attack against a 2.
But the way you've just described it, all you need is a 4, and you've succeeded. You're not gonna fail to do enough damage to break it.
Right.
Glass with your weapon. Minimum damage on the weapon is enough to break the glass. Your entire goal to shoot out a window, that's all you're doing. You're shooting. You're hitting the glass. It breaks. If your goal is to shoot them through a window, then the window doesn't act as cover. It's just an object between them and your target.
Isn't that shooting out the window though? Like, isn't that creating difficult ground? Would that be another one of those tricks?
If I would say, okay, so if I shoot out the window, right? If they're all barefoot, then yeah, they're on difficult ground. It's gonna change for you as the GM with the situation and narrative as far as what penalties you're applying.
Well, and I think there's a bit of a question here, and again, go back to intent. The guy's running through the diner. Are you trying to shoot the guy, or are you just trying to shoot the window?
Try to shoot the window.
Why are you shooting the window? Are you shooting the window to spray glass inside the diner and cause a difficult scene? Or are you shooting the window so that the window won't be there?
Yes.
These are two separate things. So once we know your intent is, you're shooting to break that window because you don't want them to have that 1 or 2 points of object toughness as additional armor.
Right.
You're spending an entire action to just shoot that. Roll a 4 to hit a target at short range, just roll a 4. Medium range, just roll a 6. And you've hit the target, it's broken, it's gone. If you're trying to blow that inward, I might still require you give me the roll to hit it. But more than likely, yeah, it's more like an agility trick because you're trying to create rough ground or something of that nature. It all depends on intent. So this is where it's very important. Have your player not tell you what their action is. Have your player tell you what effect they're trying to have. You know, and I do this all the time, Jared. You've seen me do this in the game where someone will narrate, well, I'm going to do X. And I say, okay, but what are you trying to achieve with that? And the reason is that it might mean it's a different mechanic that gets you to the same place that you're trying to go, but you were thinking too directly about the way things are written rather than the actual myriad of rules that actually exist within the game.
Well, so it's like what we've said before too, with not taking things too literally when you're applying the rules, especially when it comes to hindrances or edges. That all comes down to trappings. It can mean any number of things as long as the outcome fits. So if it's, hey, you know what? My character never bathes, and I want this to be a hindrance. He never bathes. He always smells like hot garbage. Okay, that's the outsider hindrance. Or because it gives him a -2, he's a little bit of a social pariah. Or maybe it's the habit minor.
Could be habit minor. It could be ugly. People
find ugly. Yep.
You're disheveled and unclean, so you're ugly. So Carlin asks, could you double up and say you're using the cover fire rules to hit the window and maybe shake the player? I think what he means there is suppressive fire. We've had a couple people mention suppressive fire, so I will give you guys a quick rundown on it. I want to qualify what I'm about to say by saying Clint Black on the forums had said suppressive fire is probably something that'll get changed in a later edition. They're not completely comfortable with the way that rule currently works. Here's the way suppressive fire actually works. You have to have a full auto weapon. You declare I'm doing suppressive fire. You lay a medium burst template on the table. And then you put dice on the table. All shooting modifiers apply except those that actually affect the target, like cover. All shooting modifiers apply. Whether it's obstructed, whether it's dark, whether you're at long range, you're full auto, so you've got the
-2 for...
Or you've got rock and roll so that you negate that. All that stuff applies to the attack roll. If it's successful, you have basically created an area that suffers shaken. Everyone in that then has to make a spirit roll against your total that you rolled. If they suffer a failure, they're shaken by this. If they roll a 1, not only are they shaken by it, but they actually got hit and take damage. So suppressive fire is kind of the easiest way to think of suppressive fire is it's stun caused by an automatic weapon. Mm-hmm. It's the stun power. I just throw out this medium burst template and it gives you bam. Here it is. This is where it occurs. Unfortunately, it's highly convoluted in the way it's worded. It's not overly used because, quite honestly, a good number of games just don't have fully automatic weapons in them. The way our particular hobby plays out, and the fact that this is a more pulp-heavy crowd that plays Savage Worlds for the last several years. We just recently had things like Rifts came out, and we've got, I believe it's called Ghost Ops or Ghost Sector or something like that that's getting ready to come out. They've blown apart their Kickstarter. They've gotten so many stretch goals, and it's pretty much a constant. Like, I get maybe 2 emails from them a day of the next stretch goal they've reached. So there's definitely a desire for that modern military thing out there, but the suppressive fire rules just haven't been played as much. They don't come up often, so it's not something everyone's familiar with. Really, all it does is it causes shaken. The damage comes on the defender side of that dice roll, because again, it's an opposed dice roll, like we talked about earlier at the top of the show. It's your attack roll versus their spirit roll.
All right. Okay, so here's what I want to tackle real quick too. If nobody's brought this up in the chat so far, fear. I want to bring this up as fear because I want to talk about something very specific type of fear. The Cthulhu and or highly grotesque, oh my God, I just watched somebody go through the propeller of a plane. And I'm standing here covered in gore and blood and ichor dripping everywhere. You're automatically shaken. You don't roll for it. Yeah. This is a nausea, fear-inducing situation. We got it's a situation. Everybody's covered in head to toe in somebody else's body parts that have gone through a wood chipper.
You come around the corner. It doesn't even have to be you're covered in it. You could just come around the corner on a scene that is viscerally disgusting and disturbing. It doesn't have to be scary. Yes, it could be a dismembered child, but it could also just be you come around the corner and the entire room is covered in peanut butter. It's just disturbing. Right. You're nauseated by the smell of it. Instantly shaken. Now give me that spirit roll versus the nausea.
Nope, you actually make a vigor roll.
I'm sorry, you're absolutely right. Yeah. It is a vigor roll.
You make a vigor roll to avoid shaking.
If that's a Cthulhu setting, then the GM is actually being nice, because if you see something like that, you roll sanity because you're done.
But you could do. Well, here's the great thing though too. So, for example, the fear is not meant to cause you not only to be shaken; it has a visceral effect which causes fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's really happening. Is you're witnessing this horrific thing man was not supposed to see, or it's so grotesque and visceral that you're just, oh my god, trying not to throw up. You're immediately shaken by it as you process it. And you make a vigor roll not to get a level of fatigue. If you roll a 1 on your vigor trait die, you also then roll on the fright table.
Yes. This is where that type of fear turned into the other type of fear for your character. You've just absolutely lost it and lost your cookies at the same time.
So if you're trying to play something Cthulhu-esque, understand, a result of that could be heart attack.
Oh, the fright table is absolutely disturbingly bad things happening to your character when you roll on that fright table.
Right. You could develop a major or minor phobia. Major phobia, peanut butter.
There's something good anywhere on the fright table. And here again, though, fear is one of those places I personally don't like the rules in Savage Worlds.
I don't like the main fear rule. And I agree with you, Dave. I don't like the main fear table roll on the fear table thing. I agree with you. But for the nausea effect, I want to make that distinction because I don't think enough people, GMs or players, realize there's 2 types of fear to roll in Savage Worlds.
Now, the part of the rule that makes the most sense to me, other than what Jared's talking about, where you have nausea and then you have fright, is the jaded rule. If you've got player characters who are immersed in frightful things repeatedly, sooner or later, they do become jaded, and they stop either having to make the fear roll at all from certain things, or they certainly don't suffer the penalties that would normally stack up. So remember to keep in mind when jaded would apply. If the characters are coming upon the same scene over and over again, they get to a point where it doesn't affect them any longer, and it takes a much bigger and much more defined sense of fear. If you really need an example, go rewatch Ghostbusters. Watch the first 2 attempts to deal with a ghost versus, they're talking to an elder god with cigarettes hanging out of their mouths and don't freaking give 2 shits. There's this idea of we've seen it all, we've been there, we've done that, we've spent the t-shirt money on beer, and the fear roll it's off the table at that point.
Right. Now I'm gonna posit this, and this is something that Dave and I both use in our games when it comes to fear, and I'll explain the reason why we do this too. Dave and I are both of the school of thought that how your character reacts to fear should not be a random roll on a table. It should come from role play. It's part of player agency. You're mechanically afraid. Give me a spirit roll not to be shaken. Once you're shaken, now you're afraid. You tell me how you deal with that fear. I don't need you to roll on a table that gives you a heart attack randomly because you failed a spirit check. You can have a character who is heroic and gets that fear check and just goes, fuck it, I'm out, and runs the other way. Just instinctively turns and DTFOs.
Yeah, and it's to the player that happens to. It has just violated everything about their character. If they've got the character who would never, ever run when someone else is in trouble. they've taken loyal, they've taken heroic, they've paid those hindrances so that their character has to run toward the fire. And now the fire scared them so much they ran away, and the player is completely out of control. They can't make the character do anything else. It feels like a video game. It feels like someone just took control of your character away from you, slapped you on the hand, told you you're being a bad player, and I'm going to play your character for you for a few minutes. It's a horrible thing. So at that moment, make that dice roll about something that matters, shaken or not. Oh, a natural one might have additional effects. You know, you want to leave the ability for there to be a heart attack, a stroke, a physical mess on the ground, whatever, from that fear check. Put that in as what happens on a natural one, and then go from there. Let the player narrate whatever happens after the fear, and they still have to narrate it even on a successful check. Maybe they got the success, and what they narrate is their character staring fear directly in the face and chomping the cigar a little harder and stepping up to do what has to be done. Let them have that moment to narrate their character overcoming the fear.
Yeah, I agree. You can do the same thing when a character's got yellow, for example. I think it would be great for a character who's got yellow, for example, to pull, to fail a fear check, be shaken, and then still just, okay, what's your character's role play your reaction to fear? The cliched thing would be, well, I have the fear, I have the yellow hindrance, I run away screaming like a little girl. And it could be, you know what? No, not this time. In this scene, this character, he's going to go gallows humor and go, I lean over to the person next to me and go, you know, I'm not afraid to admit it. I peed myself a little right there. If it makes her a better narrative, it makes her better role play, leave that decision. And here's all we're saying is just on a standard fear check, it's all about whether it shakes you or it doesn't shake you. That should be the outcome. You shouldn't have to roll on the fear table or the fright table for a random reaction to the fear. And that's just Dave and I, my own personal, here's how we kind of handle it in games.
And to be fair, a lot of that comes from a sense, let's be honest, all of these rules come from a time when the hobby was more of a tabletop board game. And you needed these rules and all these tables and results to have your character do something that the player actively wouldn't choose to have them do because it felt like losing. Now, the hobby's matured to a point where most of the players out there understand that failure can be a good thing, that failure can be interesting, that wounds happen and it's not you losing, it's just the thing becoming more dramatic, and they need a system that's a little more rich, something they can really kind of sink their teeth in from a role-playing standpoint.
We had one from Ruben. We'll get to Carlos here in a second, but I want to kind of scroll back a little bit. So Ruben Riviera asked a question for the Crazy Podcast. Within the rule set itself, what is everyone's favorite rule? It could be a combat maneuver, setting rule, etc. in Savage Worlds. I'll start with Dave. What's your favorite rule, setting rule?
You know, I hate to say it because it's used in every one of my games, but it's not.
I know what it is.
A big bombastic rule that people think of, but it's Born a Hero.
Yep.
And the reason is that it lets the rules get out of the way so that when you sit down, your novice character does everything you want them to do. You want to play a necromancer, so you took Born a Hero and you took the zombie power. Or you want to start out as Batman and Robin. So Born a Hero let you take the legendary Edge sidekick, and you quite literally have Batman and Robin. When you first sit down at novice rank 1 to frickin' play that character, you sit down with exactly the character you want to have. And then the growth that happens within Savage Worlds getting mechanically more powerful happens over time. But it's not, well, I get to start playing with one sword and a shield, and someday my character will unlock the ability to hold a dagger in his offhand.
Dustin, your favorite rule, setting rule, combat maneuver, etc.
Setting rule?
Any of that. Any one of those things.
Joker's Wild. And this is the thing. Joker's Wild is so popular that most people just assume that it is a legitimate...
It's part of the standard rule set.
It's not. It's a setting rule.
Mm-hmm.
What I love about it is since the dice are so variable, Joker's Wild adds that little layer of excitement. You know, the fact that everybody is down. As a GM, I've managed to, like, I've sent enough extras and enough minions to drain them all of their bennies, and they're facing the big bad. And then all of a sudden, my players get a Joker, and they're like, "Yeah, we're in it again."
And everybody gets a Benny, not just the person who did the Joker. Yeah,
everybody gets a Benny.
It's a sweet rule. I think I have a hard time picking between two things in Savage Worlds that I love equally well. The first being push, and the second being intimidate. And goddamn, I love to combine them into a single combat action with wild attack. We call it the Chuck Norris maneuver. What would Chuck Norris do? Well, he would walk up, he'd intimidate you. Hope to get the raise so you're shaking. Then use push to knock your ass prone, then curb stomp. All done with a wild attack. It's more of a combat combo maneuver. Now, here's the thing that I love about it. It so rarely works because you're trying to overcome a huge deficit for multi-actions. So I'm going to say this to the who's at home out there. It sounds awesome. Yeah, I walk up, I go, I'm going to hit you so hard, your kids are going to feel it. I make my intimidation roll. Aha, I shook that motherfucker. Now I'm going to push him to the ground. Strength roll. I just push him to the ground. And then I do a Bruce Lee. Bring my foot down on his throat. And I do all that with wild attack. And if the bonuses stack up, instant win. Here's the thing. Happens one time out of 10. And it leaves you in a worse position at the end. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm attracted to it. Because when it goes off big for a lot of women.
It fails big.
Right.
We actually just talked about this earlier today. A new fan of the show, hey Fuzzy Goblin, if you're out there, was talking about the fact he ran his first game, and he was asking about combat maneuvers, and that came up, and I tried to summon Jared, but the day job gets in the way. He can't follow everything on G+. And I ended up talking about it today with the guy, and he got confused. He thought it was a -6 to the first action, and no, it's only a -4. You're only doing 3 actions. And multi-action is a -2 per additional action. The first action doesn't count in that math. So it's a -4 to everything. And if you're good, if you get all those, successes, that trickles down to the point the wild attack is not at a penalty at all. Because that push prone has negated it. The wild attack itself negates it. And you end up at even trying to attack them against a target who's shaken and takes the damage right off the jump when you hit their toughness.
Right.
So it's a great maneuver in that it feeds itself when it works. It's a horrible maneuver in that, everything's in a -4 when it doesn't work.
And you look like a total asshat as a character. Like, you just tried to pull off something big and completely screwed it.
If you had worked with your team, 3 guys could have done it and had an even bigger effect. Mm-hmm. Instead, you tried to go fucking Rambo on that shit and ended up just like a soldier who goes Rambo in real life, gutted and laying as a dead fish on the side of the road.
Now, I will say this, as far as a general maneuver or a general thing, I would recommend everybody to sort of start incorporating into their games as a player or a GM. 2 things. Tricks. Because they give the bonus to everybody, not just you from an intimidation or taunt. So a trick, an agility or smarts trick, gives everybody who comes behind you that bonus. So number 1, start using agility and smarts tricks. Number 2, gang up. I see so few player characters that are supposed to be this well-oiled, unified tight-knit party playing individual spotlight in combat instead of ganging up on guys and taking a team approach. But
here's the thing. You don't even have to actually attack a target to grant gang up to another player. The archer can step up, stand next to the bad guy, and shoot another guy. And on the warrior's turn, he's going to get that +1 from the archer standing there because the bad guy has to worry about whether the archer is going to hit him.
And those are both things that your GM does wishes you never figure out and don't know.
One of the funny things that you can do, you can actually move next to them, declare a trick. I'm going to run behind them and get down on all fours as the trick. And the next person in line does the push.
So, it's ridiculous. And trying to
gang up bonus. Gang up bonus.
That works, yeah.
Or at the stately dinner, you lean across the table and you whisper in their ear, "Me Chinese, me play joke." That's going to take guys back to the 70s. That's not meant to be a racist statement or epitaph. It's meant to be a nostalgia statement and epitaph for those of us who grew up in the 70s.
Please address all hate mail to
the statements Jared Gunning are not necessarily the ideas and opinions of the GM podcast.
Except that they are. Yeah. So did Carl Kendrick of the Hill People have
Carlin had mentioned when we were talking about Shaken from Fright, yeah, he asked about Shaken outside of combat. And I think this is one of those things that kind of gets hand-waved. From a mechanical standpoint, there's a really good chance you're going to have recovered from Shaken, especially if the next time your character acts is the next scene.
Right.
You can pretty much hand-wave that. But no, when you're Shaken outside of combat, it has all the effects it has in combat. You can't take active actions. You can only move your pace. These are things that absolutely matter, and they should be taken into account, even if it's just to have an NPC notice you're stumbling, you're glassy-eyed. It doesn't matter how it plays into your game, but as a GM, you need to keep in mind when any character becomes Shaken outside of combat, and have it have a narrative effect. You have to put that tail on it because otherwise you're completely taking away the viability of Shaken in these non-moments. Mm-hmm. One that was asked early on by, I think it was Alec before he had to leave, was about the penalty to pace for wounds doesn't exist any longer. That was an old rule prior to Deluxe. Deluxe did away with it, just like Deluxe did away with the, I believe it was half pace on Shaken in the original rules. There's a lot of older versions of the rules that are a bit more punishing when your character takes damage, is shaken, etc. If you want to look into those old books are out there. You can absolutely find them. There's a good number of people in the community who will share a PDF with you. You may even be able to contact Pinnacle to see if they've got any laying around. I don't know that you can order them from the website, but I'm sure if you contacted them and they have them available, they might make that available to you. Shops out there may still be carrying the old version. But yeah, there's older versions of the rules where that absolutely was the case. In the modern version of the rules from Deluxe, that's been removed. You don't have a penalty based on wounds to your movement. You don't have have reduced pace on a Shaken.
You can't spend bennies for experience points.
Yeah, you don't get to hoard bennies and then at the end of the night make a dice roll for each benny to see if you gain an extra XP for the night.
Yeah, no, and there's no D20 alternate. Used to be you could roll a D20 and there was a way to do turn order.
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of alternative rules that have been in the older books, optional ways on doing things. A lot of that stuff, if and when they ever come back, are also available through the forums and whatnot, because there's a lot of discussion out there about these older rules.
I think there's actually Savagepedia might have it.
Savagepedia may have that as well, but that's not an official site. So I always kind of tend to shy away from recommending it to people, because anyone who gets access to it can just go there and edit it, kind of a wiki page.
Right.
So stick to official sites.
So here's one of the ones I want. There's two I really want to talk about because we want to have a newbie focus. That's the reason we're kind of discussing these rules, and also too for some of the things for us have been playing for a while that we've overlooked or misinterpreted. Want to go back to this one real quick. When you're shaken, it means you've taken damage equal to your toughness, but not 4 above. So let's just real quick touch on the fast, quick, dirty way to figure out damage and toughness. So when you're hit and when I roll damage, I roll my damage against your toughness, and anything that meets or exceeds it by 3 points, not 4, 3 points, is shaken. If I attack you and you're physically shaken and somebody comes up behind you and hits you again for shaken, the same result with a separate attack, you're now shaken with a wound.
Now, I just want to point out that if you are shaken, it takes damage equaling toughness plus 8 to cause 2 wounds. You do not take a second wound simply because they rolled your toughness plus 4, because shaken says you're wounded on toughness. That's great, but the first wound is all the way up to that plus 4. They need that plus 8 to get that second wound in a single shot. It doesn't matter if you're shaken or not. To get 2 wounds on a single attack, you must do toughness plus 8 to achieve a 2 wound result.
Right.
That's the only way to get there. I understand that it's a real stumbling stone. Everybody's like, well, yeah, but it's 8 more than I needed to hurt him. I get it. Because he's shaken, you only needed his toughness. But it's still not enough to get all the way up there to get, what you needed for the actual 2 wound result.
Right. So, and here's the thing to remember. In Savage Worlds, whenever we talk about the word raise, we're talking about 4 more. That's all that means. A raise means 4 more on a dice roll.
Okay. So, why don't we get into, if we're going to cover this, let's go ahead and clear something up. What happens when a creature has hardy?
Okay, well, let's back up. That's a little bit more advanced step. Let's get to that.
All right.
Okay, so in damage, your toughness versus damage. If I meet and exceed your toughness by 4, a raise over your toughness, you're now shaken with a wound, because the automatic effect of becoming wounded is being shaken. Ow, that hurt. What? Huh? So if you take a wound, you're automatically shaken. So here's how you figure it out at home, kiddies. I hit you. You have a toughness of 5. I hit you for 15. You deduct 15 from, you take 15 minus 5, divide it by 4. That's how many wounds you have. That's the simple, easiest method to do it. What's going on, Dave?
Jason Chapman brought up the shaking gate.
Oh. So
you're being beat up in chat for a second. That's all.
Okay.
It's Schadenfreude. I am laughing at your expense.
Okay. So if you're shaken from a physical attack, you get shaken from a taunt. It does not become a wound. You have to be shaken by the same source for it to become a wound, actual physical damage. So here's the other thing. When you're wounded, the second you take damage, you must decide, am I going to suffer the damage or am I going to soak the damage? You have to make that decision as it happens. That is, spend a penny, make a vigor roll. For every success you get, you eliminate 1 wound. Every raise, an additional wound. you must soak all the wounds. If I give you 8, if I deal 8 wounds to you, you have to soak all 8 wounds to not have any kind of negative effect. Every wound that you have, up to 3 wounds, causes a -1 to all actions, all dice rolls. Did we leave anything out in that study of how to apply wounds to damage in your toughness? Because it's very basic stuff, and it turns a lot of new players' heads upside down when they try to read it and try to apply it at the table the very first time.
I think the big issue here is it's something that needs a few more examples. There are entire YouTube videos out there just about shaken and the way it intertwines with damage. There's things like, well, what happens if you get a second shaken result, but it didn't come from damage? Well, it doesn't cause a wound. Does the first shaken have to have come from damage for the second shaken to cause a wound? No. The first shaken doesn't matter how it occurred. There's a lot of variables there that, again, what I believe Dustin brought up earlier, you're trying to make this more confusing, more difficult than it actually is. Take a step back and look at the rule from a large picture standpoint. Instead of drilling way down to the minutia, step back, look at the big picture. Are they shaken? Don't care how it happened. What is the second shaken from? Damage, not damage. Damage. Okay, then it's a wound. Was it +4? Still just a wound. Was it +8? Now it's 2 wounds. You sit down and do that. There are a lot of people have wound trackers. Be careful with those. A wound tracker, if it doesn't have that notation, might give you a second wound on, too little than what you need to actually achieve it when you're reducing all those numbers by 4 because you've hit their toughness number instead of the actual first wound. So it can be confusing, but I think honestly, if you take that step back for a moment, get confused, take a step back and look at kind of the big picture, reanalyze it. You can get there pretty quickly.
I think part of it
is slow the game down.
Or just watch a couple of actual plays from Savage Worlds from game masters who know what they're doing, and just you'll pick up on it. Now to Dustin's point, Dustin's point,
we make the shaken mistake, and we've been playing the game for 10 years.
Yeah,
so don't beat yourself up for it.
A lot of people coming into this, you have to explain to them, shaken is not a wound. Shaken means you're doing something else. Like, say you're running along and all of a sudden you hit your ankle or you stub your toe, and whatever you were doing or concentrating on that point, you're not on that anymore because something happened that drew your attention away. When you're shaken, it doesn't mean that you're hurt. It means that you can't focus on the attack or on those actions that you would be making beforehand.
Yeah, it could be any number of ways you want to trap it. Shaken just means your defenses are slightly reduced because you got your bell rung.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or you got your bell rung, or somebody streaked through. Somebody ran and did a streak right through the middle of your combat zone. Shaken should be whatever it means for narratively what's going on in that particular scene. We've just said that it has the Roy Schneider effect from Jaws. It's not total fear. It's, oh my God, I'm just processing what I just fucking saw. That's not possible. That can't exist. What I just saw cannot exist in nature. That is not no. And then his reaction to Jaws popping up at the end of the boat, going back down, is a very calm backward step with a lit cigarette hanging out of the dangling from the end of his lip, going, "We're going to need a bigger boat." That's shaken in that situation. If you have hardy, or you're facing a creature who has the hardy ability, they don't receive wounds from additional shaken stats. But the thing to remember is you need to soak all the wounds. You're not just soaking 4 because the 4th one incapacitates you. You're soaking all of them.
And don't be afraid as a GM to tell your players, no, the target has hardy.
Mm-hmm.
Don't have to obfuscate the enemy's abilities and things like that. If you tell your players this thing has hardy, then they know as soon as those dice hit the table what the result is, and they're not having to wait for any feedback from you. That's especially good in a game where you're using things like Blood and Guts, because then the player can make the informed decision as to whether to drop that Benny and go for additional damage, because they know, well, that's only a second shake and it's not going to cause a wound. Maybe I want to drop the Benny and get this in while I can.
I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I always tell my players if they have a special ability that the players should know about, because here's what I'm thinking as a GM, right? I'm thinking that if you are trying to somehow impress people with these special abilities and hide it from the players, you've already gotten too deep in your own mix-up. You've gotten so deep in your own ego at that point. That breaks the first rule, make it fun. It's got to be fun. And if you're going to hide that because you want your players to, the moment you want your players to think you're clever in something that you put in a monster, forget about it. Forget about it. It's done.
They're not going to pay attention. They're not going to notice. I have played with veteran GMs who don't notice the little clever things I put into the game because they're paying attention through a player lens. They only care about what a player cares about. They're not going to see the end joke for what it was.
There was one more that I thought was overlooked a lot as far as the rules I wanted to touch on and discuss, but for the life of me, it's escaped me since we talked about wounds and damage.
There's so many we could touch on. Things like non-lethal damage. Non-lethal damage causes wounds that have to be healed, folks. It still causes a wound. You still have to make a healing roll. And if you don't heal within an hour, it's still subject to natural healing. Bitch, it takes a while to heal non-lethal damage, just like it does regular damage. It's just incapacitation from non-lethal damage results in being knocked out rather than dead. It's the only difference between the two.
Oh, that was the other one too. So incapacitated doesn't mean unconscious. It can, if as a player you choose it to mean that you're unconscious, or the GM declares, well, it means you're unconscious. It could just mean that you're laying on the ground going, oh God, I can't, oh no.
You just picked a fight with the Hulk.
I can't move or do anything.
You cannot even take free action once incapacitated. Remember, talking is a free action.
Right.
You as a free action, you can talk. If you're incapacitated, you can't talk. Your jaw's dislocated. The wind's been knocked out of you. You're stunned by what just happened. You're screaming in pain. Don't care what the reason is, but you can't then be a backyard quarterback and start giving the rest of the party instructions on what to do in character.
Well, I would say this, if you're playing in most of my games, if you're incapacitated, you're fully conscious. So you get to sit there and revel in the evisceration of your party members and soak in all that horror. But I will allow you, as a courtesy, right before you become incapacitated, to moan at your best groan, "Avenge me!" and then sit there and watch your party die. But all right. I don't think there's anything else that, I mean, we could go on. This could be a 4-hour podcast talking about rules.
All the different rules. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of things in the book. The biggest suggestion I have, if you're a new player coming to Savage Worlds, sit down and read cover to cover the test drive rules. If you can understand the test drive rules, you actually understand 85 to 90% of everything you need to know about Savage Worlds to actively participate in a game. You even know most of what you need to run a game, because a lot of the other stuff comes up situationally. Mm-hmm. Most of the core stuff that you have to know is really truly in the test drive rules. It's one of the fun things about the test drive rules in Savage Worlds, the way it works, the core conceit of the game is so simple. Unlike a lot of games out there, the test drive rules are pretty close to a complete copy of the rules.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, and I think also, too, Dave touched on it briefly. I'll touch on it again here in summation as we're kind of wrapping this up. I think the biggest other confusion point is multiple action penalties and how they apply. It's a -2 for each additional action to all rolls. So if you take 2 additional actions, you get 1 for free. You take 2 additional actions, it's a -4 to everything you roll, including the free action that you have. So, and just keep that in mind. The multi-action penalty is based on a -2 applied to all rolls. You can take up. You want to take 10 actions? Go for it. Savage Worlds say take as many actions as you want. Each additional action you add gives you a -2, and can kind of mess up your ability to try to pull that off. But hey, you know, if you got big brass ones and a stack of bennies, go for it. So on that note, this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning for Dave, the Rules Maven Scott, and Dustin, the Savage Intern, saying keep rolling and stay savage.